Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know that discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Hello and welcome back to I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Booncher. This is episode number 7, next on the main stage. I was working as an officer in our Special Investigations Bureau on a squad that we called the Special Enforcement Unit, or SEU for short. This is a squad comprised of 4 to 5 SWAT officers, and we performed a variety of duties such as surveillance, fugitive arrests, undercover work, property crime investigations, search warrants, and just about anything for other work groups within the department that were needed. One of our administrative tasks involved regular contact with detectives that worked specific crimes such as homicide or robbery, theft, sex assault, and others. So if any of these detectives needed help with surveillance or apprehension or gathering evidence, then we'd coordinate that with them to help them with their cases. Because depending on the assignment, some of these men and women could have as many as 70 cases that are assigned just to them. So anytime we could lend them a hand, it was important and we needed to do it. One of the guys on my squad coordinated with this robbery detective quite a bit, and it often led to some good work for us. These investigations were always interesting given the threat of violence and the typical violent potential and priors that most of these people had, and the severity of the crime and how the victims were affected. The majority of robbery suspects are drug or alcohol abusers. Some had problems with gambling, and some were desperate to pay bills or recover from a major financial hit. And then there's the rare one or two here or there that didn't so much need the money as they enjoyed the thrill of committing the crime. But no matter the reason, robbery is a crime of violence due to the implied or actual threat of physical injury or death, and typically carries heavy sentencing for those that commit the crime. This is especially true for repeat or serial robbers or anytime someone's injured or killed during the commission of the robbery. The longer I was with the department and exposed to crimes and the investigations that followed, the more I learned just how much crime affects victims. Prior to that, I only knew what everybody else does, what I saw on TV or movies. People are affected, but it was superficial, and most of them got over it quickly. It's the same as when that TV or movie cop kills 8 people at some crazy scene and just drives away while their dorky boss is yelling about, get that paperwork on my desk by 8 tomorrow morning. It didn't take long for me to realize and better understand just what it was like to be the victim of a crime, especially a crime of violence. Whether it was domestic violence incident where you just couldn't understand why this woman wouldn't leave this piece of garbage, or, a single violent incident such as an attempted homicide or a sexual assault or something similar to that. Some of these victims are terribly scarred by the event, and some are never normal again. Some of them even attempt or commit suicide, and some turn to drugs or alcohol or both to soothe their pain. I learned it was best to just treat these victims with compassion. Never insinuate that I could understand their pain or suffering, especially the women. No joking about anything, no trying to minimize their experience, just respect and clear, direct questions and direction. Now for sex assaults, you just pray that there's a female officer who could come and help you, or a sex assault trained officer to come and help you out. So for this story, if it was cop to cop, you'd say, well, at least he didn't shoot you. Take a deep breath and go to the next call. But that's not the right thing you say to a civilian. Most normal people are just not accustomed to having a gun stuck in their face by some creepy, tweaked out maggot suspect who's yelling at them to get the cash or they're going to blow a hole in their head. It's traumatic, and it's life-changing in some cases. We used to say a person who is soft on crime, with regard to light sentencing or it's all about reform, etc., was usually that way up until they were the victim of a violent crime, and then it switched to death penalty and maximum sentencing. Contrary to what you may envision as a robbery, it can occur on the street, in a convenience store, or in a bank. It doesn't have to involve cash either. The rough definition of a robbery is the taking of property or money or anything of value with the implied or the actual use of force or a weapon. So while people commonly refer to being robbed when a car's broken into or your home's broken into, it's actually a burglary. But if you put people into that car or into that home, then it almost always turns that into a robbery. The guy walking into a bank pointing a gun at people and demanding money is a robber. But a man can grab a woman and fight with her over her purse, knock her to the ground, and that's a robbery. The examples I just mentioned above about the car and home are robberies, and those are commonly referred to as a carjacking or a home invasion. The person can enter Circle K, go up to the counter, and threaten having a gun in their pocket, the dreaded finger gun as we used to call it. A person can threaten you with a baseball bat and tell you they're going to hit you in the head unless you hand over your wallet. Robberies. There are slight variations on the specifics and the sentencing guidelines depending on the jurisdiction, but they all follow my definition. So while not all robberies are as dynamic and violent and dangerous as what you'd see like in the movie Heat, they're all still taken very serious by law enforcement. By the way, if you haven't seen that movie, Heat, highly recommend it, as will almost any cop. We all love that one. So our robbery dick tells us that there's this guy who's hitting banks in the Phoenix area. True bank robber, so to speak, and he's getting pretty decent amounts of money each time. When we got involved, he had committed, I believe, 4 bank robberies in our city and another 7 in surrounding jurisdictions, so, total of 11. Because of this, the robbery detectives from effective departments, as well as an agent from the FBI, were regularly meeting to make sure that everybody was up to date. Years ago, the FBI used to investigate any bank robbery due to the federal government's regulation and involvement with the guarantee of the funds. But in most cases now, the local jurisdiction will respond and investigate any bank robbery. Now, if there's good follow-up or there's a known suspect, then it was just uncanny how an FBI agent would suddenly appear and take jurisdiction of the case, because they can. In a case like this, where there's a serial trend or if someone was hurt or killed during the robbery, then they would always get involved. So criminals like this bank robber and crime waves like this get everybody nervous, especially the upper administration for your department or jurisdiction and all the city government folks. Nobody wants to be the city where this guy hits a bank and shoots or, God forbid, kills someone during the commission of another robbery. Because then the police department and the government in that city are going to get beat up. Why didn't you solve this yet? And there really isn't any explanation that will appease the uproar. But the other jurisdictions exhale deeply and, wipe their brow and just thank their lucky star that it didn't happen in their city or county or town. So after a short time, our Tempe robbery dick was able to get this robbery suspect ID'd, which was huge. You can't arrest somebody until you know who they are, and this guy was just particularly slippery. So great work by our detective, and always nice to be the department in a major multi-jurisdiction investigation like this to break this key piece of the puzzle. Now the problem is to find him. So we were happy that the suspect had been ID'd and wanted to get involved. Problem was that nobody could find him. He was transient, meaning he had no known residence or address to check. The other jurisdictions were all looking as well, and there were just no good leads. And there was one other thing. So shortly after they got our suspect identified, and we'll call him Paul, they were also able to identify a former girlfriend. At least that's what she told the few detectives who contacted and grilled her about where Paul was. And, she said over and over that they'd parted ways, they broke up, and she had no idea where he was or what he was doing. And since she was so consistent with her interviews, it was essentially accepted that she was either telling the truth or she was just never going to give up where he was. And I think that one jurisdiction put a surveillance team on her for a little while to try to see if she'd lead us to him, but that was unsuccessful. So the last piece of info on this girlfriend is that she's a stripper, and she works at a club in Phoenix, which was interesting and elicited all sorts of inappropriate comments, but not so helpful. Because as with some other professions, anybody who works in or around a strip club tends to be a pretty tough cookie. If they haven't yet gotten in trouble with the law themselves, they've heard and seen many of their coworkers, boyfriends, girlfriends work their way through the legal system. Many tend to hang out with people who break the law, use drugs, and generally draw more attention from law enforcement than the average person does. And the majority just don't like being around cops, period. It's just the way it is, and you need to know your audience if you want to do your job well. So because of all that, when it comes to police contact, there's not much bluffing. They know what they can and can't do and what they should and shouldn't say. So while it's a great lead to have a former girlfriend identified, it just wasn't very promising as a way to get to Paul. And as I said, a few detectives had tried and failed already. Except us. We hadn't tried, and I knew from my time with my squad that we were pretty good at getting things done and getting things figured out. And I have to admit that the thought of going to a strip club, chatting up a stripper, and getting her to tell us where her serial bank robber boyfriend was sounded pretty cool. So I tell the fellas what I was thinking about doing, and while they didn't hold out much hope, they thought it was worth a shot. I talk about it with my sergeant and pitch my case. And as expected, he wasn't very excited about sending guys to a strip club in another city to try to do what a number of other cops hadn't been able to do. But I said, hey, boss, those guys are stuffy detectives or know-it-all FBI agents, not plainclothes street cops like us with the gift of gab, right? So luckily for me, the night's fairly slow so far, and I was pretty persistent. And my boss had worked with me long enough to know that he could trust we wouldn't do anything stupid. And how great would it be for us if we could pull this off? He finally agreed to let me give it a shot, and we both agreed I'd need someone to go along with me. Another guy in our squad, Blair, was up for going. Blair was an easygoing cop, very laid back, and he had this slow Kentucky drawl that we always teased him about. But he was perfect as a second for this mission. From the prior interviews with the girlfriend, we knew her work schedule at the club, and wouldn't you know it, she was scheduled to work that evening. It was all falling into place. With some obligatory warnings about not getting into trouble, drinking too much, or making any promises we can't keep, we were off. So in a situation like this where we go to a bar or a club or hang out with a criminal as part of your UC work, there's unwritten rules that have to be followed. And these rules are learned early on from the senior guys on the squad, usually during the course of giving you the crash course on picking up your first prostitute. Working in plainclothes is admittedly some of the coolest work you could possibly do as a cop, but it's also very fraught with opportunity to get yourself into trouble in a lot of ways. These unwritten rules that these senior guys teach you in the beginning are what are going to keep you out of trouble or keep you from getting hurt or killed. So for this evening's mission, the concern is going to a strip club, consuming alcohol, being around some shady folks who don't like police, being armed, and working UC in another jurisdiction. So what could go wrong? We load up and drive separately to the strip club, and in the event that things morph into a surveillance, 2 cars are better than 1, and you just never know how things are going to unfold. So we'd already kind of discussed our plans before we got there and had a general game plan for approaching this gal in the strip club. So we get past the doorman and into the club, no big deal there. We find a table that's next to the main stage and set up camp. We knew what the woman looked like and what her stage name was, so it didn't take us long to locate her, and it was also midweek, mid-evening, so it wasn't that busy as comparative to, say, like a weekend. I've been to a strip club or two, and I pretty much knew what to expect. The first thing you see, or rather smell, is the cloud of cigarette smoke that saturates you with the first couple steps in the door. And at the same time, your eyes start to struggle to adjust to the darkness and the strobe lighting as well. You know, for a business like this, lighting, strategic lighting, is an important consideration. You know, you put me in there, drink yourself a couple cocktails, and I'll have you convinced that I'm a stocky Brad Pitt with a bald head in no time. Well, we get this woman's attention, and we'll call her Brandy with an I, and wave her to the table. This is the trickiest part of this whole thing. So we have to ID ourselves, discreetly, give a seconds-long pitch as to what our intentions are without scaring her away or making it obvious that we're the cops, and try to gain her trust, all while she's trying to work, and hope that she doesn't tell the no-neck doorman to kick us out of the place. She bends down to listen to what I have to say, expecting a half-drunk guy who wants a table dance or thinks that she's going to entertain going out with him later. I have to say the look on her face didn't hardly change at all, much to her credit, when I told her who we were and that I wanted to help her help Paul not to get himself killed. And that was about all I could get out while trying to whisper/yell in her ear while Guns N' Roses' Welcome to the Jungle's blaring over the speakers. She stands up and looks around without being very obvious, and I can tell she's nervous, but I don't get the impression that we're done either. She bends back down and whispers in my ear that she'll be back, but she's next up, meaning she has to take her turn on the stage to dance. So does that mean that she's going to tell the door goons to kick us out? Will she go backstage and disappear? Or will she actually come back over? I don't know, we weren't sure, but I felt she was going to come back and talk to us. It really didn't matter. We couldn't do anything else but wait and see and kick back, nurse our beers, and watch stuff. So with the DJ announcing, and next up on main stage, Brandy with an I came out and started dancing. We do laugh because she definitely made it a point to give us some extra attention, which was a little uncomfortable. It was one of those weird times at work that you just never forget, and Blair and I laugh about it to this day. And yeah, have to admit that so far it had been a pretty tough day at the office. She finishes up with her time on stage and makes her way back over and playing it up pretty well. Some short, louder, kind of customer talk at first, and then she pulls up a chair next to me and lets me continue to talk. It's at this point I'm pretty sure Blair and I have her won over, and if she knows where Paul is, we're going to do our best to find out. But I have to work on this between her other customer obligations, drink waiters who keep bugging us trying to figure out why we haven't finished our first beers yet, and her anxiety that someone will figure out who we are and why she's talking to us. And all the while appearing like we're just the average male customers who think the stripper's hanging out with us because she thinks we're cool and we're going to meet up later. She gravitated towards speaking more with me, who knows, and doesn't matter, but we were just happy that she was still speaking with us at all. I threw out my pre-planned pitch that we were here to find out where her boyfriend was. We knew she knew where he was, and we wanted to be the ones to arrest him instead of the other cops because we could do it without getting him killed. As soon as I began the part about keeping him safe, I knew they were still together, and I could see that little glimmer of compassion in her eyes. Back and forth a couple times, at first denial that they're together, and she had no idea where he was. So I hang in there, said I knew she knows where he is, and just played it cool. Like, I know. There's no question. I know you know where he's at. And I also held back on what we'd normally do, which is we'd threaten to arrest her on a hindering charge when we found out she did know where he was. Brandy wouldn't have fallen for it anyway, and I'm sure it would have basically just shut everything down right then. So our beers are getting low, the fun of being in there had kind of worn off, and we're starting to wonder if we're ever going to get her to give this guy up. But we couldn't rush it. We just had to be patient and let what we'd been telling her soak in and order a couple beers. At her last visit to sit with us, she just blurts it out. She admits she knows where he is and just asks that we don't hurt him. Just please just don't hurt him. She says he's desperate, he's sworn he's not going to go back to jail, and that he won't be taken alive, blah, blah, kind of the usual stuff that we've heard numerous times before. I almost can't believe it, and Blair and I exchange a glance that tells me he's thinking the same thing. I ask Brandy to tell me where he is, and she gives me the name of a small hotel in the cross streets, which is good as the address. So slow and easy, Blair stands up and takes a last drink from his beer, gives me a grin, and heads out toward the door to go out and rally the troops. And I just tell him, I'll see you there. Without giving her the impression that I got what I needed, so now I have no interest in her anymore. Sound familiar? I tell her that I have to go and help with keeping him from getting hurt. She's a little taken back at how quickly things have shifted, but I assure her that I'll keep her updated and that I'll meet her later tonight after work to get a little more info for my report. She gives me kind of a pleading look and goes back to work. Now it's my turn to take that last drink of beer and try not to start running as I make my way outside to get going. Well, by the time I get there, fire up the car and get the radio on, I already hear the chatter of the rest of my squad heading toward the motel as Blair's relaying that other info. There's no time for anything other than getting there and set up and trying to locate this guy before Brandy starts feeling guilty and maybe makes a call to warn him. The motel's not very far, and the rest of my squad get there pretty quick. As they get into the area, they're not seeing anyone jumping out of windows or anything, so that's a good thing. They immediately start picking up positions and setting up, guys grabbing the eye, guys taking takeaway positions, go-with positions, etc. Blair gets to the hotel, and I listen as I'm still heading that way. And so far, everything's sounding really good. As soon as we get set up, somebody has to go in and try to confirm the information that we got. Because there's always a chance that Brandy sent us on a goose chase and just trying to pull us away from where her boyfriend may be or just to be a pain in the butt. Once in a while, you'll get stuck on a really lengthy surveillance only to learn that the target was never even there to begin with, which is pretty frustrating. So Blair gets the call to go in the lobby and check around a little bit. Since he came from farther away than the rest of the guys, he got there after they had kind of set up everything, so it just made sense to do it that way. So Blair takes a look at the suspect info and the photo we have, and he folds it up and stuffs it in his pocket, to show to an employee or a manager on the inside. He walks into the lobby and sees that it's not much bigger than a medium-sized bedroom. So as he walks through the door, he takes a look around as he's walking toward the desk clerk, and he sees a guy to the side, kind of looking out the windows and acting a little nervous. So as Blair nears the desk and starts pulling out the paperwork to show the desk clerk, his brain kind of catches up with what he just saw, and That guy looking out the window, that's Paul, and who is now suspiciously looking back at Blair. The desk clerk, oblivious to everything, says, do you need something? Blair mumbles something and just kind of keeps walking down a hallway. So as soon as he can, Blair gets back out to his car and kicks out the info on the radio. I'm almost positive this is our guy. This is Paul, and this is what he's doing inside. So the conclusion is that he's waiting for a ride, cab, or whatever, and we start to plan for that. So calls are made to Phoenix PD, the city that the motel's in, and we relay info as to what we're doing, request for help with a vehicle stop, and things like that. Because we're all in UC cars, and the proper way to do this is definitely with marked units and a number of them. It also brings up a good point. Whenever you're working in another jurisdiction as a squad, kind of like what we do, if it was possible, and if you had the time, you always wanted to let that jurisdiction know that you were there and working. A lot of stories, a lot of crazy things can happen sometimes when cops from two agencies crash into each other, not knowing who they each are. Well, within about 5 or 10 minutes, a cab pulls up to the front of the motel. Paul comes out, looks around a little bit, and jumps in the back of the cab. As the cab pulls away, that puts our surveillance into motion. Well, there really wasn't any point in waiting very long before attempting to do the stop on the cab, and we certainly didn't want to lose Paul after all this work and effort. We were updating Phoenix in real time through their dispatcher, and then their dispatcher was relaying that info to their patrol units. So within maybe a couple of turns, Phoenix PD is on this guy. Watching a large department respond to something like this is pretty cool. So while a city like ours, which is not a small department, I think we had 300 plus officers at the time, we could muster maybe 5 or 6 units in a couple minutes' time. Well, Phoenix had at least 8 units start to make the felony stop on this cab, and then there's probably another 5 or 6 or more that arrived within seconds right behind them. Awful nice to get that kind of help. And I can honestly say that the times that we needed help from Phoenix on a large scale like this, those guys always came through. A felony stop is where instead of a cop or the cops walking up to a vehicle after making that vehicle stop, we call the occupants out and you bring them back to us. Things are very much controlled, and the goal is to give the occupants clear and simple direction and eventually take them into custody back where we are in an area that we can control. There's a lot more to it than that, but it's a highly trained and it's a highly utilized technique to help avoid any kind of bad events from occurring during situations just like this one. The felony stop goes without a hitch. They get the cabbie out, back to them. Then Paul complies with commands and he exits and he comes back and he's taken into custody. And it's Paul, which is exactly how you want something like this to finish off. Our robbery dick responds to help with processing and interviewing Paul, and he was very grateful for our work in catching this guy. And eventually another guy was actually implicated in some of these robberies, and so he was arrested as well. The rest of my squad leaves the scene to go back to whatever they were working on prior to the big scramble, and I went back to meet with Brandy to finish off the day's work. I needed to ask questions and clarify things for the final report, as well as, just thank her for what she did. It was after midnight by now, and we met at a Denny's, I think in Phoenix, somewhere close to where she worked, so I could get her something to eat and drink an iced tea while we were chatting. Things went as expected for the most part, starting with how she looked. So in the normal light inside Denny's, much of that allure and sex appeal that was crafted so well in the dimly lit club was gone. Of course, the first thing was she was now wearing normal, comfortable clothes that a woman in her 20s, her age, would wear, not the skimpy, tight, single-purposed outfit that she had on the last time I saw her. And in the club, her makeup had been heavy and best done to accentuate her look. Most of that was gone now. No more glitter. The overall result of her transformation was seeing the difference between a sexual object designed to separate men from their money to an attractive young woman whose face showed more wear and tear than it should have at that age. There were questions and answers while she ate her dinner and I had something to drink. I took some notes, but there really wasn't much too important with regard to the criminal investigation. There's a little small talk about getting together later, but, it was just hollow, small talk. Never happened. Not surprisingly, Brandy told me about a childhood where she was the victim of different forms of abuse, inadequate parenting, hanging around with the wrong people, and making poor choices. And I'm sure I'll rant about it at some point, but for now I'll say that it was exceptionally rare in the occasion when someone like this would say, "No, I came from a loving family, 2 attentive parents, raised me with discipline and support, and I'm just not sure how I turned out this way." So after some additional thanks, I gave her my number, told her to call me if she had any problems that came about from this mess. We walked out to the parking lot. She gave me a hug, thanked us for not hurting Paul. We both went our separate ways, back to our completely different lives. And I never saw or heard from her again. So the last part of this story involved the media reports over the next couple days that this had been a big story. The first one made a vague comment about the involvement of our department, and then another couple made almost no mention of us other than we were around, and the FBI took total credit. So this is my first experience with another agency taking credit for essentially our work, and I kind of took it personally. So I called our robbery dick and I asked him, hey, am I missing something here? And in his wise, experienced way, he explained it's just the way it is. It wouldn't be the first and won't be the last. Be confident in the importance of your work and let it go. Not that it would do any good anyway. You're not going to go into some silly media war about who actually should take credit for the case. So lesson learned. Thanks, Jeff. Our work group was recognized by our department for our work in locating Paul and stopping this serial robbery trend, which was cool. So, there are a few main stages that were taken during the story, and I'm glad to have been on the best one. With that, I close another episode of I Barely Got Here. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe on your podcast directory to keep up on new episodes. If you have a question or comment, please shoot me an email at ibarelygodhere@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Sam42 is 10-7.